Hello and welcome to another album analysis. In today's video we're going to be looking at the 6th studio album from the post-punk revival band White Lies, titled As I Try Not to Fall Apart. But before we do get into the album, I think we need to talk a little bit about the actual genre itself. Post-punk revival is in a genre that has been quite popular at times, but has also had some very low lows and has really kind of dropped off the face of the earth at times. Over recent years, we've seen some bands kind of making a bit of a re-emergence in different forms. Bands such as Interpol have continued to produce music throughout the years, kind of not having that mainstream success, having that very underground scene. Similar bands such as Editors, with many other bands actually opting to move away from the genre entirely. But bands such as Interpol and White Lies have stuck with that sound and really tried to hone it, really tried to make it work. And because of that, White Lies have certainly not really been that big mainstream hit. They've managed to be able to stay consistent, and that's something we see across most of their albums. They've never ventured too far away from that style. They've tried a few different things with previous releases, but this album is certainly going to see that almost reshuffling of that post-punk revival sound that they know and love so well. So will this album hold itself together or simply fall apart? Let's take a look at it track by track. Opening the album, we do have Am I Really Going to Die? Straight in with that mortality, those depressing themes that we do tend to see in post-punk revival. It's just something that's kind of encapsulated the genre over the years. But something quite weird and quirky we're going to be seeing on this track is the use of this very funk-laden guitar. It's almost like something out of a Chic song, and it does create this really diverse, weird sound that just, it's almost like they're taking a bit of a joke and a bit of a laugh at mortality, which is quite strange. But for some reason on this song, it just seems to fit in quite nicely, even though at first, upon first hearing it, you think this is a little bit strange, but you just kind of really come to find a bit of a groove. It gives this song this story, a pacing, and that's what Harry McVey does on this song. He actually builds a story. It's this story of somebody finding out they're going to die. Some of the quirky lyrics as well. I need validation for your parking lot. That's the idea of they're going to a hospital. They need a reason to justify the price they are paying for parking their car at a hospital. And if you live in the UK, it's quite extortionate if you do want to go visit a hospital and have to pay for parking for even just 1 or 2 hours. But it's just this quirkiness. It's this storytelling that I really do like with this opening song. It just kind of gives us an intro into some of the things we're really going to be looking at on this album. Quite negative themes, but almost throwing that quirkiness and that really interesting way of trying to build it up and make it a bit more fun, rather than it being the sort of album you listen to and just feel completely depressed by the time you get to the end of it. Next up, we do have the title track, As I Try Not to Fall Apart, which has these very moody, Morrissey-esque vocals from Harry, which work very well with his deep tones that he has got in his voice. But again, we've got a contrast. We've got these synth pop elements that are thrown in to give it this uplifting bubbliness when we're dealing with quite morbid elements. And this song actually just is, again, very reflective track. We are looking at male stereotypes and this idea that men can't show emotion or weakness. And he does it in a very interesting way. It's dances around the subject and then kind of goes straight in for the kill, but it uses questions very heavily in the songwriting. There's a lot of questions being asked, and it's something that I think a lot of men do. They question, why am I feeling like this? Why am I being like this? I should be strong. I should be never showing any weakness. And even in the parts of the lyrics where it's more built like a statement, it even has that questioning nature to it by kind of raising the vocals a little bit at the end of the lines, and it almost has that back and forth as well. There's always a lot of conversation building and world building in the lyrics that they do like to put into a lot of their music, and this is shown again through this track. And the lyrics, the way that it always feels like a two-way conversation, but you're only hearing one side of it, and it does make it a much stronger track. And they did actually some really interesting things in the music video for this as well, with the kind of sand being poured onto Harry, almost like that weight being put onto your shoulders, also that idea of time. So really do like to play with the messages not only in the songs but also in the videos, which does make the track much stronger because of these heavy meanings and the way they build the songs around it. In at track 3 we do have Breathe. Now I love what they do with this. It's a much slower track than the first two that had those synth pop elements, those funk-laden guitars, and I like this idea of slowing a track down and the track being called Breathe. It's that perfect idea of when you need to calm down, you're told to just watch your breathing, slow your breathing down, and that's what this song does. And it has this almost plodding swag to it. It has these much slower undertones that allow you to just kind of just vibe along with the song at a very slow and leisurely pace, and it kind of, you almost naturally feel yourself slowing your breathing just while you're listening to this track, because it has those elements that it wants to sort of show and really kind of use the music to kind of build that as well and kind of get that message across, which is crucial to making it as strong of a track as it is. The only downside though, it can at times be a little bit repetitive. The song does feel like it goes on a little bit, and there's not as much built into the lyrics as we have had in the first 2 tracks of the album, but I love this pace change. I love the way they've used the music to really kind of blend that in and make it an all-round encompassing track that all revolves around the idea of sort of calming yourself and just really slowing your breathing to a pace to kind of help yourself calm down after what's been quite a couple of tracks at the opening that have dealt with these ideas of mortality or sort of struggles that you go through in modern life. Then we have I Don't Want to Go to Mars, a song that could have potential different meanings depending on which way you want to look at it. First of all, you've got that political meaning with Elon Musk and this idea of kind of space travel, colonizing Mars and all these things, and it talks about that through the use of the lyrics as well. What kind of brainwashed idiot does? This idea that you're being sold something, the idea that you're being brainwashed into believing that it's a good idea that we go to Mars, and it could also have that environmental message as well, this idea that we're destroying our planet and we're thinking about moving to another one because we've ruined our first chance and want to kind of move and have a fresh start. So already you've got these 2 different ways of looking at it depending on the situation and how your kind of brain wires into it. We do have these very heavy distortion on the guitars at times, which give it this very otherworldly feel. It kind of adds those spacey elements to it, as well as these long drawn out guitar notes which feel like they're shooting into space. So that just really adds these couple of small little elements to this song that really give it those extra bits and pieces, those extra little layers on the cake that really just help pull the track together and do make it a very strong effort from the band. Then at track 5 we do have Step Outside. Now this song is infectiously and efficiently bouncy and positive. It has these really nice feelings of just taking a step outside, going out walking. I think the song actually revolves around Harry McVeigh's love of climbing that he doesn't get to do enough, but that idea of if you're struggling mentally or just having tough time, going for a walk, something super simple, step outside and things will feel more positive and you'll feel a bit more bounce in your step. So that's straight away we've got the title just telling you exactly what it does on the tin, and that's the great thing about many of these songs. They're not just wrapped up in layers and layers and layers of meaning. It's pretty much surface level and you can break it down very easily on what the song is trying to reflect. If it's dealing with mortality, if you're dealing with mental health, it's all things that are very accessible and most people can understand. One weird part we have got in this track is this slow drop towards the later stages of the song that does slowly build back up, and I think for a song that's meant to be so positive and uplifting that it certainly can sort of lose some of that pacing in that middle part of the track. But at the same time I kind of get, if you understand the meaning behind the song, the idea of Harry loves going rock climbing, I almost feel like that's the point where you hit the summit, that point of reflection, that point where you're just looking out at the great beyond if you've been climbing up a hill and you've just got that view around you. So I think that's what he's trying to convey through that drop and then that slow build of continuing on your journey. It's something that's kind of feels more personal to him, which is quite great, but as a listener you don't get that same accessibility unless you know the meaning behind the track or where the inspiration came from. Then we do roll into December for track number 6. Now this is a song that's much more brooding. It almost imitates this late night walk. It's much more eerie with these scratching guitars that we have got, just adding that element of enclosure, that idea of this eeriness to it, which is quite interesting at times. It does work. The only downside to this song is it does roll on a little bit too long. It's got about a 6-minute runtime, and once you get to the 3rd, 4th minute, you're coming to the point where you want the song to kind of come to an end. And although it does have this build towards the later stages and some really clever lyrics as well that use contrasting wordplay, so right thought but wrong feeling, you've got these double 2 sides of the coin thrown in together, which is great to see. I like the use of contrast in most songs. It's just a little effect that many songwriters have begun using that just really adds different perspectives to a song and really just kind of builds both sides, so that's great to see. But unfortunately, just the sad thing about this song is it just does feel a little bit too long, even though it has got a nice outro to it and a nice slow build later in the later stages. I could think it could do with maybe being 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes tops as opposed to 6. Heading into track 7, we do have Ragworm. Now this is a song that has some great rhyming lyrics, which help really add a good flow to it. And one other thing I want to touch on as well at this point is some of the drum patterns from Jack have been really strong in making sure he's adjusting his pacing depending on the track. Some of these slower tracks, he's just really matching very well with Harry, and really the guitars, the bass and the drums all really do fall in line very well in building the pace. They're never kind of outstepping each other or trying to go off at different paces, which is something that's really strong to see that they've done on this album, and they've done on most of their works over the past kind of 15 years that they've been a band. It's something they've kind of lent on quite heavily and done quite strongly over the years. We also have a great guitar solo for this song. It's not something we see all too often, but it is occasionally interspersed into their albums, and Ragworm seems to be the song where they've picked out for that guitar solo to make an appearance. And it is a very miserable track overall, which is quite weird when you have got these very flowing lyrics, but it kind of touches more on the idea of poverty and prosperity. I feel that, again, two sides of the coin. They like to throw a lot of contrasts onto the albums, and this song is certainly no exception to that rule. In at track 8 we do have Blue Drift. Now this is a song that makes a beautiful use of synth and guitar. It almost feels like a dance, like a tango. At times they're working on their own, they're doing their own thing and being prominent in the song, and then every so often they come together to build this massive area of sound, these really high peaks on the song, and they also do the same on the low sections, because this song is very much adrift, like a wave. It goes up and down. There's lots of levels to it, which is great, and it's probably one of the reasons they did actually release it as one of the singles from the album, because I do feel it makes it a very, very strong track, just having these super high highs where just everything comes together, everything culminates in one big explosion of sound, and that's the brilliant way that they've constructed it. It's almost this feeling of a wave. You're drifting. Again, everything ties together so neatly. The lyrics, the title of the song just work in great unison, just like the instruments on Blue Drift, which do help make it probably one of the stronger tracks on this album. Then we do come to The End, which surprisingly is not the final track on this album, so they have lied to you on that one. And this has a really nice layering of vocals, which give it a very much dreamlike effect. And this song does seem to talk quite heavily about the idea of the end of life. It's got lyrics such as awash in the sun, this idea that you're being bathed in light if you're effectively going to heaven, you're in those final moments. So it's quite interesting that they didn't actually throw this as the last song on the album, but it would have had that very depressing outro, even though this song has revolved around the idea of not trying to fall apart. And when you die, that is probably the biggest way you can fall apart, because you no longer continue to exist. But it does have some of the interesting elements as well. The sound of people just before the end of the track, almost imitating the idea of you hear these final sounds before you pass away. So I like the way that, again, they've used the title of the song and the lyrics to really pull each other together to help convey that meaning of what the song is trying to push out as a message, and it's something that they've done quite well on a number of these tracks. And the song actually rounding out the album is There Is No Cure For It. And if you guessed it, this is another song about death. There's no way of avoiding it. There's no way of curing it. It's something that's going to come to everybody. So that negative emotion is already straight away there. This idea of, no, we can't fix this thing. It's a finite idea. And this song does it in the style of a story. It's a story about a car crash, about somebody not wanting to take risks. They take a risk and then they pay for it by losing their life. It is a very morbid way to round out the album. And it does also convey that very strong message of, you can't avoid death, just go out, live your life, whatever will be. So I like in the way that they have thrown this as the final song on this album. It's great that they've kind of not had the end of this, the very super depressing ending where you bathed in light and then that's it, you are no more. So I kind of like that they've got this key message at the very end of the album. They've stuck it on the end just to make sure that's the final thing you hear before the end of the album, just this idea of go out, live your life, because there is no cure for death. I think overall I'm probably going to have to give the album a 7. It's a very strong album with its meanings. The music is very interesting, how they blended in these elements, the very strange funky guitars, the synthy elements that they have occasionally used, but blending that idea with guitars as well, so being that middle ground between some of the other post-punk revival bands and really just trying to pull together an album that is chock full of meaning and covers some very important topics. And it's very rare that the music steps out of beat. It does feel like they've really constructed a strong album musically with some of the elements they have thrown, the guitars, the bass, the drums, all falling in line and really just working in great unison. It shows that the band have spent a lot of time together. They've never had a lineup change, and that shows because they all do work in great unison. But I don't feel this album has any particular standouts. It's a good album, it's a great album, but it's not an exceptional album. And that's something the band have probably not been able to do since their 2009 album To Lose My Life, which probably was their strongest. So you kind of have to compare it to that because of their sound being so similar across multiple albums. And I do think it has some really powerful tracks on here. Some of them are great. I mean, I love the bounciness of Step Outside, but I just don't feel it has those songs that really make you go, wow, what a fantastic song. They're steady, they're stable, and they're consistent, and that's why I think I have to give the album the score that I have given it. So that is everything for today's video, but as always, please let me know your thoughts about the album in the comments below. Maybe you feel it deserves a higher or lower score, maybe you don't feel it's one of their strongest albums, or maybe you feel it is the best work they've done in quite some time. So please do feel free to let me know your thoughts, and if you want to see more content like this, then please do feel free to subscribe, and I will see you in the next album analysis.